Hello and welcome to the news for Wednesday, September the 3, 2025. And when putting together these bulletins, sometimes it's hard to determine what is going to be your lead story, especially when there's more than one that should be a lead on any other day. So where do we go? Now, big news, as usual. First of all, we're going to hit the big one. This is Jeffrey Epstein, not necessarily the biggest story of the day, but when you work out what will change the narrative, first and foremost, it's got to be Epstein. Now, let me give you the information here for you first up. So the House Oversight Committee in the United States has released Epstein records provided by the Department of Justice. That has happened today. That is big news. We haven't had time to get through it all, but when you see this next clip from Congresswoman Paulina Luna, it opens the great big Pandora's box. Take a look.
Bigger than I think anyone anticipated. We are obviously going to be requesting the SARS reports from Treasury, and also too following up on that. There are some very rich and powerful people that need to go to jail. I think everyone's been frustrated as to why that hasn't happened before. But it is very much so a possibility that Jeffrey Epstein was an intelligence asset working for our adversaries. But also, too, I think the questions that we have is how much did our own government know about it? And so there's more to follow, and I'm sure you'll be hearing from the chairman momentarily. But I do applaud the victims from coming forward, because we heard from a woman who was as young as 14 years old when she was victimized multiple times by Jeffrey Epstein. So that's hard to hear.
Will you sign the discharge petition and ask the discharge petition?
I think that the files will probably be released prior. I don't know why Comer hasn't. I think that he should do it, so it wouldn't even have to come to a vote. But, I mean, obviously I've been a huge advocate, even when I was the only one in Congress calling for the release of this file. So I think I'd be happy to, yes. Thank you.
Do they call for the victims? Do they want those files released?
The victims want information to be out there, but they don't want their personal information, I think, for good reason to be out there. So I think from the get-go, even the Attorney General has stated that there's victim information that you have to make sure that's private, being that some of the victims also, too, are as young as 14. It's child pornography. No, thank you, guys. Okay.
Well, there is a huge story, and Paulina Luna confirming Epstein likely an intelligence asset. Now, I know that you know, and we all know that this is old news, but the difference is when somebody in a position of authority connected to the Oversight Committee is calling it, it's a big deal. Then she mentions foreign adversaries. So who could that be? Well, you cancel it out. If it's not just CIA, because that's not foreign, but you're looking to the UK, MI6, Israel, Mossad. And how is it that Trump can go this far, clean out the CIA, clean out the FBI, and not clean out MI6 and Mossad? Can't happen. They're all going to be cleaned out, and this is coming to a head. And this is also because of you and also the people that we fight with that also think that they know best and that Epstein is going to take out Trump. Well, whatever's going to get to the truth. The fact is that if Trump is on the list and Trump's done some bad things, well, we're going to want to take him out as well, unlike the others that will then cover up for their crimes, which, of course, will become the theme for this particular show. Well, let me show you some more interesting information today. John Podesta in this one, where you've got Roger Stone. This didn't age too well. John Podesta is now on the list for indictments for conspiracy. Enjoy prison, Roger Stone says, you pedophile. There it is. You can see there Podesta, he said once, he can strut and he can do his Nixon impersonations, but maybe when the cell door clanks, you'll feel a little bit more remorse. Well, that's John Podesta. John Podesta, page 2 of the Q posts, number 2, second to be arrested, if you want to follow on with that. And that dates to late October. So I wonder if this is going to line up. Well, who else is lining up? The Clintons. Check this one out from August 30th from Shadow of Ezra. Bill Clinton has now revealed his health is slipping again after he and Hillary were leaving the Hamptons with a defibrillator in hand. The device, capable of shocking the heart back into rhythm, is a tool reserved for life or death moments. Is at the end for the Clintons, writes Ezra. There's Hillary looking a little bit dishevelled, and there's Bill Clinton carrying around a defib device. There you go, as he goes onto a private aeroplane. Did we think that this day was coming? Who knows? Well, is that the biggest story of the day? I don't think so. I'm going to play you a clip now from Dr. David Martin. This one, breaks it down. This is post what Trump came out with the other day. So let's just recap for you. I'm going to give you this right here. This was Trump's tweet the other day. I hope Operation Warp Speed was as brilliant as many say it was. If not, we all want to know about it and why. There you go. Robert Malone chiming in. The real reason for the recent CDC resignations is that the ACIP committee on COVID-19 vaccines got approval to investigate the safety and efficacy of COVID vaccines, and they knew the gig was up. The truth was about to come out, and they would have to account for their actions. All you need to be is ready for the recently approved terms of reference for that subcommittee, and it all becomes clear. Let's now play for you Dr. David Martin, part 1, where he explains that the WHO knew that a respiratory virus was going to be unleashed, and the reasons for it, which many of us suspected, was the old take a look.
Now, how did they know that it was deadly? Well, let's look at their own words. Let's not try to infer from anything. On September 18th, 2019, one day before President Trump signed the executive order, which was the forerunner to what became what we call Operation Warp Speed, when he signed the executive order on September 19th, 2019, having been instructed to do so by Alex Azar, then the director of the Department of Health and Human Services. They stated at the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board of the World Health Organization that there was going to be a quickly spreading lethal respiratory pathogen that was going to be unleashed for the purpose of creating the reason that the public would accept a universal vaccine by September 2020. Let's review the dates again. The World Health Organization said that in a publication, The World at Risk, on September 18th, 2019, that there would be a lethal respiratory pathogen released. They said that the progress indicators of the success of the World Health Organization would be in September 2020. There would be a uniform vaccine program rolled out worldwide. And the day after that publication, on September 19th, 2019, President Trump signed the executive order, which authorized the rapid development of a universal or pan-influenza vaccine program, including the use of DNA and other genetically modified products.
Now, what do you think about them apples? Let's go to the next stage now. David Martin is going to talk about all the things that President Trump needs to be aware of. Let's go to that clip and we'll come back.
And I thought it would be very helpful to point out a couple things just so that we all have the same data, because President Trump, in his tweet, suggested that there's a possibility that the miracle of Operation Warp Speed potentially was not what it was cracked up to be. And I wanted to just give a very, very quick overview of a couple points that we should address. First of all, the data he requested is not going to come from Pfizer or from Moderna. The data that he needs to see is the data that actually comes from public records that have been repeatedly shown on this platform for the last 5 years plus. First of all, the first data they need to know was that SARS was a direct result of gain-of-function research from UNC Chapel Hill's work on WIV1. That's the Wuhan Institute of Virology viral model number 1, which was a sample provided to University of North Carolina Chapel Hill, Ralph Barrick's lab, under an authorized grant by Anthony Fauci's NIAID. And that sample was transferred in 2014 during the gain-of-function moratorium. There is no question that in 2015, when the paper was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, that the world was put on notice that the Wuhan Institute of Virology virus pathogen bioweapon model was poised for human existence, because that's exactly what they said. It's important for President Trump to know that on October 2014, Anthony Fauci's NIAID violated the law and authorized the gain-of-function research on the Wuhan Institute of Virology virus to move forward at UNC Chapel Hill, while the head fake was to suggest that EcoHealth Alliance was doing it in Wuhan. The fact of the matter is, and is evidenced by the statements in the paper, that the gain-of-function research created the biological weapon that became what we now refer to as SARS-CoV-2. And that was published in 2016. They knew that the ingredients that they were putting in the shots were either deadly or debilitating. Let's start with the deadly. They knew that pseudouridine, as early as 2017, was shown to be the agent that would unleash what we now refer to as turbocancers. And they knew it was going to be highly problematic, so much so that in 2017, they published a study there that laid out the risks of pseudouridine and what it could do, both in cancer promotion and in the progression of other horrific diseases. They knew that the spike protein was in fact going to target the human heart. This data was very evident since 2002 when Ralph Baric was publishing the research showing that he could get the spike protein to trigger cardiomyopathy and other forms of heart inflammation. But the publications that I have here show that by 2009, they knew that the spike protein, the thing that the shot was instructing your body to make, they knew that was going to create heart problems and potentially long-term other disease problems. And then let's get to the last one, which is very fascinating. The last piece of evidence we have here, which actually came out of molecular therapy, not only showed that the lipid nanoparticle created enormous numbers of adverse events, as much as 62% of adverse events in animal models. And this is the lipid nanoparticle used to deliver the agent of the shot. But this was not just a generic knowledge. The individual highlighted in red on this slide happens to be the individual who was the chief medical officer for none other than Moderna, who knew that there was an unacceptable high level of adverse events associated with the lipid nanoparticle. And this information was known and published years before there was any SARS-CoV-2 conversations in China. They knew that the shot was deadly and debilitating, and they made it anyhow.
I tell you what, now it's going to get deeper and darker. And this person here is going to show you what he and Raphael Lataster knew in just a moment. Let's play the third part where Dr. David Martin talks specifically about this strange 2-week window and also between shots 1 and 2. Was this the reason why Bill Gates came out very early on and said you need not 1, but you're going to need 2 shots? Why would you need 2 shots? Was it to create a window that would allow the scientists to say that you're not fully vaccinated, which would obfuscate from, guess what? When this turns into injury, how do you obfuscate? David Martin.
So all of this was done well in advance of patient number 1. They also knew that the clinical trial, as they configured it, was deceptive and would lead to an outcome that would be misleading. And this is where President Trump needs to have very clear insight. None of the data that was required by the FDA's own publication, which I have here for reference, so anybody can look it up, the FDA stipulated in 2018 that there must be data submitted prior to a clinical trial that talked about things like the immune response, all kinds of clinical outcomes, and specifically laid out the requirements for what vaccine clinical trials must include, none of which were included in what was done for the COVID shots. They changed the definition of what vaccination was, and then what they did was they cunningly used this 2-week period of time between shot 1 and shot 2, so that all of the adverse events that took place in the clinical trial were front-loaded into the immediately after shot 1 population, which was officially classified as unvaccinated even though they received the shot. What that did was it shifted the adverse events so that the public was deceived into believing that there weren't many adverse events. But the reason why was because to be considered vaccinated in the clinical trial, you had to have 2, not 1 shot. And a huge number of patients after receiving the first shot had immediate death or immediate disability. All of those were considered to be either COVID-related illnesses and deaths, or, and in every case, they were all considered to be, quote, unvaccinated.
I've been following this like you have for what, 6 years since it all began, 5 or 6 years, and there were always anomalies in the data. I started doing this specifically from my bedroom, reporting on the daily stats because the 11 a.m. reports just didn't add up. Watching Sky News one night, I saw Alan Jones, of all people, tell you that it had a 99% survival rate. And I thought, well, that's not what's been communicated in the morning news. I got onto the New South Wales public health sites, the federal government health sites, and I started comparing figures. And this is when it all changed. So I'm going to play you a clip now from a year ago when Raphael Lataster and I went to RAF and I said, listen, I've got a problem with this 2-week window. And what I mean is that it seems that when you look at the statistics, it looks like it's a cover-up to obfuscate for when these injuries were happening, because the most likely time for an injury to happen would be straight after the shot, not necessarily weeks, months, years after. There can be other side effects, things that are slow going. But if you're going to get something up front that's going to be an injury, it would happen in the first 2 weeks. What a perfect time to say, oh, sorry, it can't be that because you're not fully vaccinated. You're not vaccinated. No effective dose. Let's have a look just quickly here. Raf sent this email out after we got the FOIA request back, and he said, dear media friends, this is pretty big. I teamed up with Jason Olborn to deliver this breaking news. Estimates of COVID-19 vaccine effectiveness derived from New South Wales government COVID-19 reports are unreliable up to early 2022, with people who received the jab being lumped in together with the unvaccinated. Exactly the sorts of issues raised by the likes of Peter Doshi and myself in the JECP journal. Different definitions were later used with no recognition of the potential harm done regarding the former. So we sent off a FOIA request to see if there really was a difference. The New South Wales government has decided not to fully answer our request, either because they don't have the data anymore, or they don't have the data that they want to share, or they have the data but don't want to share. And then he wrote a Substack article on it, which you can check out at OK Then News. Breaking COVID-19 vaccine counting window issues confirmed in government reports, and they can't share the data. Estimates of the effectiveness derived from New South Wales government reports are unreliable, is what he said. They don't want to share. Now, in it, we get into this particular information. Now, I want you to look at the top there, section 4, clinical severity by vaccine status. And you'll see those dark blue columns, vaccine status, total cases, hospitalised in ICU, and death. And when you read, it says 3 or more effective doses, 2 effective doses, 1 effective dose, no effective dose, and unknown. And if we scroll down further, it gives you an example, no effective dose, and defines it. Cases reported as no effective dose received their first dose of a 2-dose vaccination course less than 21 days prior to known exposure to COVID-19, or have not received any vaccine dose. Using the phrase no effective dose indicates that an insufficient period of time has elapsed to allow for maximal immune response provided by the vaccine. It does not indicate that vaccines are ineffective. Historical cases in children aged 5 to 11 between 16 June 2021 and 9 January 2022 have been assigned no effective dose, as have all cases in children aged 0 to 4 since 16th of June 2021. So what does that mean? Maximal protection. So in other words, if you got COVID in the first 3 weeks taken after a jab, well, they're not going to say that you were protected by the jab. You're technically still unvaccinated. But then if you get an injury, it can't be a vaccine injury because no effective dose. You haven't got a dose. That's not an injury. Even if you got myocarditis, well, what is it? Is it just random myocarditis, viral myocarditis because you just happened to get COVID and the next day you got myocarditis? It doesn't make sense. This is what David Martin is talking about. It's very confusing. Let's cut now to part of the interview with Raphael Lataster, and we'll see if we can load up the full interview onto the Substack page a little later. Take a look. Now, here's the point that we're getting to today. This is the thing that bugged me for a long time. I couldn't work out what it was. I'm just going to cut straight to the chase for those that are watching. Have a look at this. This was the common data from the New South Wales Health that we used to get a breakdown week on week from New South Wales Health of the COVID deaths broken down by vaccine status. And as you can see, 4 or more doses, 3 doses, 2 doses, 1 dose, no dose, and unknown. What we couldn't work out, that we kept seeing week on week, was how was it that normally you'd have hospitalizations, and I'm just going to show for people for the full data there that you can see what I'm talking about. The first column is admitted to hospital, but not ICU, then to ICU, then to deaths. If you go down, it would stand to reason that you'd have 60 hospitalizations, 8 ICUs, 7 deaths. That's a normal occurrence. Then it starts to get a bit wobbly because you have 180 hospitalizations, 14 ICUs, 42 deaths. But when you go down to no dose, you have 1 hospitalization, no ICU, and 12 deaths. We looked again in July, and this used to happen week on week. And in this particular case, the no doses, no hospital, 1 ICU, 19 deaths. It was working backwards. It was counterintuitive. It made no sense. And I was wondering, therefore, when I spoke to you about it, what would happen if, for example, there was this period of what they call no effective dose, or a window when people were vaccinated, but they weren't counted as vaccinated. So we did a little bit of digging, Raph, and then we worked out that there was something going on here. In fact, there was a change of language. And I'll bring that up on the screen for people right now, just to talk about, to show you what we mean here. There's a term there when you look down on the left-hand side, 3 or more effective doses, 2 effective doses, 1 effective dose, and no effective dose. This is repeated, no effective dose. Now, something happened. Can you tell us what happened in terms of the language that went from no effective dose to no dose? And what was this grey area that was happening?
Yeah, so the no effective dose business, and 1 effective dose, 2 effective dose, that relates very well to the research I had published alongside Peter Doshi in the JCP journal, which indicates that there's probably some really big exaggerations of effectiveness going on with all the clinical trials, all the big observational studies, and now we're seeing it in the government reports as well. And if you look at the definitions in their own reports, and with this FOI request, they basically acknowledge that yes, those groups like no effective dose actually includes people that took a dose of the vaccine. So it's not really unvaccinated. The people in the no effective dose category, some may be vaccinated, some are people that took a dose. And then it changed. So that's already a huge question mark. So anyone basing their figures, the estimates of effectiveness, vaccine effectiveness, already off the mark because of that, right? We can't trust those figures. And then it changed. It was, I think, February 2022 was the last time they went with the old definition, and from March 2022 up until December 2022, when it stopped suspiciously, when it looked like the unjabbed were doing really well, the reporting by VaxStatus just stopped, and there they started talking about dose. Right? 0 doses, 1 dose, 2 doses. Well, before they were talking about effective doses. So that made us think, hang on, is this actually the case? First of all, what do you do about that? Throughout all this period, they were talking about no effective dose. Suddenly they've made this change without any sort of recognition, no great fanfare in the media or anything like that. No great recognition that, hey, we've done this and it's led to inaccurate estimates of the effectiveness of the jab, and therefore inaccurate estimates of cost benefit analyses, that sort of thing, and nothing, no apology, nothing. And so we wondered, is this actually the case? Like, they've used different terms here, and that would presumably have a different definition. Is it actually the case now that no dose means no dose? And that's why we fired off this FOI request, or JIPA as it's called here. And yeah, we got our response, didn't we?
Yeah, we certainly did. So look, just to clarify, from the vaccine came out in February of 2021. And for 12 months, New South Wales Health reported the idea of no effective dose as a way of explaining the difference between 1 dose, 2 dose, or more doses. But for some reason, they changed the terminology from no effective dose to no dose, implying unvaccinated. But what we couldn't work out was why so many people were dying but not attending hospital or ICUs who were classified as no dose. And the reason I bring that up before we get into the outcome is this. I just want to recap. This is to show you exactly what's going on. this is from the NCIRS, the National Immunisation Register, that the vaccine came out 22nd February 2021. So what I did was I then went and got a snapshot of the statistics on that particular day, what we knew. As at 21 February 2021, there was a total of 28,928 cases of COVID in Australia, including 909 deaths and approximately 39 active cases. Over the past week, there was an average of 4 new cases per day. Of the newly reported cases, the majority had been from New South Wales. Goodness me. So 28 cases in a week and 15 or more coming from New South Wales. And of those, the median case was 37 years. This is pre-jab. The median age of death, 86, which is above life expectancy. Then what we do is we then drill down into total deaths here in New South Wales. And there was 909 deaths across the country. New South Wales, only 56 of the 909 across the country. And as you can see, not a single death in one New South Welshman under the age of 50 pre-jab, not a single person, and only 150 to 59. The majority of the 56 deaths, 51 of them in people above retirement age right there. And if you break it down to Australia, there's your 28,928 cases, 909 deaths. The majority of those, of course, in Victoria. I'm just looking for the number there. 820 of that 909 deaths came in Victoria. No thanks to Daniel Andrews and the quarantine fiasco and the nursing home fiasco. And if you cover down here, there you go. That is the Australian deaths per age group. At the day that the vaccine came out, there was only 1 or 2 deaths under the age of 50 across the country, and not a single female under the age of 50 had died from COVID pre the jab. So here's the cover of the paper that we, the JIPA that we submitted. This is the letter that we got back from the JIPA specialist addressed to you, the applicant, Dr Raphael Lataster, Associate Lecturer at the University of Sydney. So there we go. We've brought everyone up to speed. Raf, what are the outcomes? What have we seen?
So they basically acknowledged that, yes, our interpretation of how they were reporting numbers was correct up until February of 2022, that, yes, they were indeed lumping people that took the jab into the group where the unjabbed are, the unvaccinated. They acknowledged that. And then they basically said when it came to the new definitions from March 2022 onwards, no dose means no dose, regardless of time. 1 dose means 1 dose, 2 dose means 2 doses. So, that sort of ends that, like, oh, okay. It looks like they, at least from that point on, they were doing the right thing. But then they added another point where they basically said, of course, you might want to confirm this, but we're not going to allow you to confirm this. That you'll just have to take our word for it.
Yes.
Right? We don't have the reports anymore where this data's in. We don't have those reports anymore. And we would have to go and basically craft new reports. And we don't have the time to do that. So it sounded to me like they don't have the data anymore, if they ever did, or if they did have the data, they just don't want to give it to us.
News from around the world as it affects us at Channel 51. The latest interviews, the archives. The world is changing rapidly. Putting it all together, buy one, get one free. Subscribe at channel51.com.au and get QCitizen.net for free. Daily news, twice weekly interviews, archive of hundreds of major interviews, special events. Thank you for supporting independent media.
In the meantime, let's have a look at this tweet coming out of Japan. This is shared actually on Facebook by Dr. Miley Trin, Red Pill Dispenser. Professor Robert Clancy has drawn attention to a shocking new Japanese study involving 20 million people, which found that all excess deaths were in the vaccinated group. The non-vaccinated group had none. Well, how about that? The plot keeps thickening and we will continue to focus on it. But this is the work of doctors and reporters around the world who have continually worked non-stop around the clock, and are happy to have been a part of that for you. In the meantime, also in Australian news now, this one from on Facebook, John Armfield, he says a cover-up has been exposed. ADF leadership is a protected species. A defence cover-up, risk intimidation and political protection. Ray Hadley has blown the lid on how defence operate as a law unto themselves. The retired MRH-90 test pilot Major Ian Wilson told Hadley he was intimidated by senior Army officers after giving evidence on the deadly Top Owl helmet technology. Defence even tried to intimidate Hadley in the inquiry room, forcing him to appeal to the chair, Judge Margaret McMurdo. So much for non-adversarial fair income, Madam Chair. I've come here in good faith. Now, freshly unsealed federal workplace safety documents reveal the Department of Defence knew the substantial risk of fatigue to pilots but failed to act. Investigators allege Defence committed Category 1 and 2 offences under the Workplace Health and Safety Act, recklessly exposing members to risk of death or serious injury. Test pilots had already warned, posed an unacceptable risk and feared if released someone would die. Yet 4 soldiers did die, and still Labor, Liberal and the Lambie senators blocked a Senate inquiry into this fatal crash. Our service women and men and their families deserve answers, not cover-ups. Instead, what we see is Defence intimidation, silence and senators shielding the truth. Defence knew. Defence failed again, and now the politicians are protecting them. And another story here, this one, Kirralie Smith, written by Kurt Malberg. Another New South Wales court finds Kirralie Smith guilty for calling male-born soccer players men. A New South Wales court has ruled that calling a person born a male, a man, amounts to unlawful vilification, adding to a series of legal setbacks for women rights advocates. Kirralie Smith, 2 lengthy judgments handed down Tuesday by Defence Deputy Chief Magistrate Sharon Freund focused on a collection of social media posts made in 2023 about Stephanie Blanche and Riley Dennis, 2 male-born players who compete in female soccer divisions in New South Wales. I'm satisfied that the defendant unlawfully vilified the plaintiff when she referred to the plaintiff as a male or a man. Freund wrote in the ruling, Smith, who serves as director and spokesperson of Binary Australia, may face penalties of up to $200,000 in fine, mandatory apologies and compulsory re-education to affirm the idea that men can become women. Well, if that's not enough, now I'm going to show you a clip coming out of the UK where Piers Morgan is now saying that the UK, it is turning into North Korea, if you can believe that, where a comedian flying to the UK has been arrested. 3 tweets, 5 cops, and arrested for comments about trans, and they were meant to be taken as a joke. Jokes no more. Have a look.
Comedian Graham Linehan was arrested at Heathrow Airport in the UK over past social media posts he made on transgender issues. The 57-year-old said that 5 armed officers arrested him after he flew into the UK from Arizona. In a statement, police said the man in his 50s was arrested on suspicion of inciting violence. This is in relation to posts on X. After being taken to police custody, officers became concerned for his health, and he was taken to hospital. Linehan responded to the arrest saying, I was arrested at an airport like a terrorist, locked in a cell like a criminal, taken to the hospital because the stress nearly killed me, and banned from speaking online, all because I made jokes that upset some psychotic cross-dressers. To me, this proves one thing beyond doubt. The UK has become a country that is hostile to freedom of speech. Critics calling out the arrest. Piers Morgan posting, what's happened to Linehan today is absolutely ridiculous. 5 armed cops arresting him at Heathrow for tweets mocking the scandal of biological men invading women's spaces. When it comes to free speech, Britain's turning into North Korea. End quote. Is Piers Morgan right here?
The situation in the UK is extremely bad for anyone who cares about freedom of speech or freedom of religion. And it's actually a problem for the rest of the country as well, because social media companies develop policies to fit with the architecture of UK. And so then it also makes it harder for people to speak freely in the United States and other countries. If you cannot speak freely about radical trans ideology or other issues like that, you are not free. You have to be able to be free to say men cannot actually become women, or only a man and a woman can make a baby biologically. When you can't acknowledge just reality, you're not a free people at all. And this is a huge of many wake-up call for the UK and about the threat they are posing to freedom of speech globally.
Yeah, and obviously speech is different than violence. You know, this guy, did he have a hand grenade in his bag? No. Was he traveling with a bunch of knives and weapons? Is that why they arrested him? Because, you know, clearly that's what you would do if someone appears to be violent.
Absolutely not. And, you know, if you think back to Vice President Vance went to the Munich Security Conference back in February and spoke exactly about this sort of thing, warning the EU and the UK as well that this is not going to be tolerated. And to your point, Kennedy, like his tweet is you know, if a cross-dress person's in a women's bathroom and you're a woman and you feel threatened, kick them in the private parts, call somebody, yell and run. That's not inciting violence, but yet the lack of any respect for expression like that, free speech, and an issue, as you point out, Molly, is a big one right now. And here in the UK, they're going to crack down. The guy tweeted 3 tweets and he's taken down Heathrow, like he says, like a terrorist. I think this is going to be a case that's going to be a big boiling issue for the UK. And it'll be interesting to see if Vice President Vance picks up and does anything with it, because I think this is what he was really warning against when he made that speech in Munich.
Yeah, and it's interesting because free speech has now become the cause of the right. So, you know, back in the 60s, it was the leftists, it was the hippies, and, you know, they were the ones who were more interested in protecting free speech. But the pendulum has swung not only in the UK,
Isn't that
but here
remarkable?
as well.
Just want to point out, he is expected to be in a Westminster court on Thursday. He's accused of harassing a transgender woman, Sophia Brooks, and damaging her phone, which he firmly denies. This was reported by the Irish Times. So we'll see what happens there. It's obviously a separate incident, but I didn't actually see or hear of this until Piers Morgan put out that tweet about this meeting, because I didn't know this was happening, or that I didn't follow him, and so I didn't see these tweets firsthand. But when you look at the actual tweet itself, I believe we just had, if a trans-identified male is a female, so if a man walks into a woman's bathroom, okay, he's committing a violent, abusive act, make a scene, call the cops, if all else fails, punch him in the... I mean, this is obviously the take of one individual. It is his view, and for Piers Morgan to point out that if we see more and more of this happening, that this is Britain turning into North Korea, this is a very scary thing.
I think also, just to be clear, in context, it's clear that he was making a joke, sending up on the issue of if a man is in a woman's bathroom, he has private parts. So it's, you know, I think that it's important to have the context of it as well.
There were more officers than tweets. There were 5 officers for 3 tweets, and they said they were worried about him inciting violence, and he's the extremist here. So to your point, to everyone's point here about the UK having to take a long look at itself, because there is a backlash against extremism over extremism.
You know, it's also interesting to note that until Elon Musk bought Twitter, it was actually becoming, in this country, something where you could not publicly say some of these truths about whether a man identifying as a woman is a woman or not. You couldn't actually do it on social media. On Facebook, you would get banned. On Twitter, you would get banned. Once he bought that social media platform, you actually could onst again speak freely. I mean, it shows what an important thing that was.
Not only banned, you know this, deplatformed. So you weren't able to, exactly, to monetize your social media if you didn't abide by the groupthink. It's very scary and has true real-world ramifications.
All right. Also in the news, and this story popped up on Cairns News, Robert Lee, deceased young Melbourne cop, was signed up with an acting agency, Vadim Dovat. Well, there you go. So he was considered, he was lined up with Star Now. He had been in some films and some ads on TV, but this doesn't necessarily mean that he's a crisis actor. Having a look at his LinkedIn profile of the deceased police officer, work experience after graduating from ACOR's fast-track graduate management training program. I worked at the Pullman on Albert Park in Melbourne as a conference and events duty manager, responsible for a team of 30. He's now currently, it said, working as a senior constable, 5 years in the job. So whether or not he was just hoping for some extra work there, but good sleuth reporting nonetheless from Cairns News and, of course, from the citizen journalists out there bringing this to the attention, because it means that you've got to ask more questions. Now, in other news, we also have that Jerrold Nadler, there he is. He is not standing for re-election. There you go. He's had enough. Jerrold Nadler is standing down and won't be contesting in next year's congressional elections. And that can only be a sign of more things to come. And let's now go over to Anthony Albanese and his idea of enrichment through migration. He's not backing down. Let's have a look.
Migrants coming in, enriching our nation through their contribution to Australia.
Do you think there's growing resentment towards migration, and does it worry you?
I think that there has always been elements. I ran for President of Sydney in the SRC against someone called James Salim, a leader of National Action, on anti-Asians being kept out.
It's always been with us, but is it rising again? And does that worry you?
Well, what we need to do is to be vigilant about it. What has occurred now is that it's much easier to organise through social media, through platforms, and easier as well for people to have their views reinforced, often of which are based upon things which aren't just fact, like our net overseas migration is falling. It fell substantially in 2024. Of course, there were going to be an increased number after the lockdown of our entire continent that occurred during COVID.
So is your message to these people, we're getting the numbers down?
Well, we are getting the numbers down, but migration also is important, and multiculturalism is a part of who we are as a modern nation. And I just say to people and I have no doubt that there would have been good people who went along, heard about a rally, concerned,
I've seen them talk about long housing queues for rentals. They're concerned about their access to housing.
Of course. But you should have a look at who you're with on Sunday, I think, and the motivation that they have, which isn't actually about housing or our economy or anything else.
Albo is doing the old COVID trick and saying don't talk to your neighbours. Guilty by association, because he has decided that he knows best and he'll bring in whoever he wants. He'll tell you when he's bringing in less people, even though he's bringing in more. And it will be him, because migrants enrich, never mind about the issues. Everyone enriches, Albo. Everyone is trying their best. But what you don't do is not look after your own whilst you're bringing in others, because that provides you with a political advantage, and we can all see right through it. But keep going, because your days in office can only be numbered, and you're one day closer to retirement. Thank God for that. In the meantime, let you play some more information. This is Scott Bessent from the Treasury in the US explaining the sanctions on Iran being pushed. This may well lead to regime change in that country from within.
President Trump has been clear. Iran must stop sponsoring terror, halt its bloody proxy wars, and cease its pursuit of nuclear weapons. That is why Treasury is taking further action to degrade the Ayatollah and his regime's ability to finance terrorism around the world, including its growing influence in Iraq. Treasury is sanctioning a rogue businessman and his network of companies and vessels that smuggle Iranian oil disguised as Iraqi oil to avoid U.S. sanctions. This network generates over $300 million annually for Tehran. Smuggling of this nature allows Iranian oil to be sold to U.S. allies and possibly to the United States itself in violation of U.S. sanctions. The United States will apply economic pressure to the maximum extent possible to disrupt Iran's access to the financial resources that fuel its destabilizing activities. Since President Trump retook office, we have implemented a maximum pressure campaign. In just 7 months, we have seen a significant decline in oil carried by the shadow fleet vessels we have sanctioned, reduced Tehran's profit margin, and made it increasingly difficult for the regime to export oil. The United States remains committed to an oil supply free from Iran's destabilizing influence. We will continue to take action against those who help fund its global campaign of terror.
Meantime, over in Chicago, the Governor Pritzker, he's not having any of the idea that there's a crime problem in the US, in Chicago, the Windy City.
You're going to hear people, especially this past weekend, 54 shot, 7 dead.
Yeah.
They're going to say the city's not safe. Would you ask your friends to ride the L after midnight or after, 9 o'clock at night even to come down to the city from O'Hare?
Look, big cities have crime. There's no doubt about it. But let's just pay attention to what President Trump is doing targeting Chicago. He's overlooking red states that have much higher crime rates.
Meanwhile, President Trump, fresh back from a break where lefties thought he was dead, here he is letting you know what he's going to do about Chicago.
Mind up on Chicago, though?
Well, we're going in. I didn't say when. We're going in. When you lose, look, I have an obligation. This isn't a political thing. I have an obligation. When we lose, when 20 people are killed over the last 2.5 weeks and 75 are shot with bullets. So let me tell you a little story about a place called D.C., District of Columbia, right here where we are. It's now a safe zone. We have no crime. It's in such great shape. You can go and actually walk with your children, your wife, your husband. You can walk right down the middle of the street. You're not going to be shot, Peter. You're safe.
Meanwhile, Carmine Sabia, who I interviewed a little over a week ago, has posted this on social media. Many rush to blame guns and assault weapons for America's tragedies, but few are willing to examine the role of SSRI medications prescribed to children, a reluctance driven in no small part by the financial influence of Big Pharma over both political parties and the media. Years ago, during an appearance on Steve Bannon's War Room, I pointed out a striking timeline. As SSRIs became widely prescribed to children in the late 1980s, mass shootings began to emerge roughly a decade later, precisely when those children had grown into adolescence. Consider the sequence. Prozac was introduced in 1987 and quickly surged in popularity. By 1998, the US experienced its first modern mass shooting of this type. In 1999 came Columbine, and the pattern has continued ever since. The firearm is the instrument, but the deeper question we must confront is whether these drugs are the catalyst. And we must ask more questions, not less, and we can never, ever sit on our hands and pretend that not knowing or not looking is the answer. It's the cover-up. We've demonstrated that today. John Armfield's story on the military. We've got the story where Jackie Lambie there refused to do the investigation. We have the same problem with COVID vaccines, and we're looking into that deeply. And, of course, we have the same problem with Epstein, and now the House Oversight Committee releasing that information, and Paulina Luna saying what we've all known for some time: Epstein was likely an intelligence asset working with foreign adversaries, and powerful people should be in prison. Tell you what, the conspiracy theorists are batting 1,000 or better than Don Bradman, but we're not conspiracy theorists. We are inquirers, and I have asked many people in the past, military intelligence, police intelligence, what is the difference between the work you're doing here and the work you're doing for those institutions? They said nothing. It's the exact same process. So we shall continue and do that interesting work that will lead to the truth setting us free. Thanks all for watching. See you all on the next show.
News from around the world as it affects us at Channel 51. The latest interviews, the archives. The world is changing rapidly. Putting it all together. Buy one, get one free. Subscribe at channel51.com.au and get qcitizen.net for free. Daily news, twice weekly interviews, archive of hundreds of major interviews, special events. Thank you for supporting independent